Hello, my friends and loyal listeners. Today I have a speaker that's been here before, Catherine Jansen Rickett,
You got it.
and talk about a lot of things, but the main thing is why is it so hard to put yourself first? I've been hearing from all of my medical people, you have to learn to put yourself first, and self-care is important, yada, yada, yada. But I've always been a doer. I've always found great joy in service. So it's really hard. Not to mention, I'm now a caretaker for my husband who has stage 3 Parkinson's disease. So this can be very difficult. So, Catherine, I'm sure that in your work and your experience with developing healthy relationship with yourself and with others, it's been a journey also, has it?
Well, yes, and I think it's so important to dig into, but why, when we get those kinds of invitations from medical providers or a therapist or a friend, take care of yourself. What's the barrier? What stands in the way of that? I would start with just we live in a certain culture where there were old ideas that if I take care of myself, I'm selfish. If I take care of myself, now the new word is narcissism,
Yes.
which is so kind of tragic. Um, so we have to undo just ideas of it first. I
Mhm.
would also say, and I, as you know, Mimi, are kind of that deep dive person of like, what's going on here?
Mhm.
Having a relationship with yourself for some people is fraught because of the core beliefs that developed along the way. So if I don't feel good enough, my relationship to myself is basically a lot of pressure so I can be perfect. So every day I can prove my worth because I don't know that it's intrinsic. Or I don't have a relationship to myself because I don't know that I'm lovable. So I have to please other people to get the love to know I'm lovable. So it's not as simple as, oh, I just forgot to schedule a massage, or it really is about having curiosity about what stands in the way, and committing to ourselves like we would others. So it's not either others or self; it's a concurrent thing. That our best gift to others is actually taking care of ourselves along the way, so that when we show up for others, we don't do so with resentment, right? We don't have secret agendas. Like, I'm going to do this for you, but you're supposed to validate my worth or agree with me or invite me to that party. So, in an odd way, loving ourselves is literally a loving gesture toward others. So, just at first glance, that's what I would offer. What lands for you that I just
Well,
said?
what lands for me is the fact that our core beliefs about ourselves, our core beliefs, are formed very young. I was told before 7, like maybe as young as 5, maybe even younger. And if, like myself, you were brought up in a dysfunctional, alcoholic, unloving type of home, everything you described is what was given to me. I had to do, I had to be helpful. I couldn't think about myself. And I
Right.
couldn't ever say anything nice about myself because then I was conceited, like just those, well,
That those seems to, yes, and that children are wired from an attachment perspective, and that's why the early years are so critical to
yes.
please, because our survival depends on that. The problem is then it becomes neural development, and then it becomes a way of being. And there's this thing called confirmation bias of like, if I don't believe I'm good enough, I will keep seeing the things I do at a human level as proof that I'm not good enough, or if I believe myself to be unlovable. So I have to swallow the message from the circumstances of my life, organizing a brain around that, but then my brain takes over again and just solidifies it over time and reconfirms it. So most people hit adulthood not knowing what brain they're working with, not understanding why they can't just change behaviors, which is maybe what you're talking about. Why don't I take care of my, and then we get mad at ourselves, which is more self-criticism
Yeah.
and shame for not doing what we're quote unquote supposed to do. So I think the practice of curiosity is where I guide people to be gentle, that there's a part of you resistant to loving yourself because that might have been, for example, emotionally dangerous in the family or in the culture.
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah.
I have a lawnmower going by. We'll just ignore him. So for me, the first half of my life, of course, I knew none of the things that we are talking about. So
Mhm.
I had to find a way to survive in a world where I had been taught these false beliefs about myself. And that led to picking the wrong men that were damaged themselves or controlling. Then it led to self-medicating, which was
Mhm.
alcoholism, which I never thought would happen to me because I hated my father's drinking. And so it was a long time. It was a horrible, helpful long time before I finally hit a bottom, so to speak. And the first rung was out of that hole was getting sober by going to rehab. And
Mhm.
um, I'm fairly intelligent. I mean, I had wanted to go to college, and my parents had blocked that. And I had managed to get 2 years in. And I had known about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is very famous. And I knew I was stuck on that first step, survival, just
Yeah.
making sure I had food and a roof over my head. And that's as
Mhm.
far as I had gotten by 40 years old. Um, and then when I did get sober, of course, AA is wonderful, the steps, all the things. But I also did counseling. I went to counseling 9 years, did it all. Um,
Well, and if I could interject on that, because people need to hear this importantly, it's its own thing and good for you, good for those in the recovery process through AA or other forms of recovery. That is not necessarily clinical work. And clinical work from therapists is something different. And we do trauma work, we get to some of those core things. So it's some people will do recovery work, kind of setting themselves and it up to be the be all end all, and it's such a precious thing, recovery. Yeah, so it's good that you're for your audience really sharing that was a part of the journey too.
Yeah, and it's not the only story that people have, is what you're getting. And in my
Yeah.
case, um, I was cross addicted and I did turn to food, and then I ended up going to an inpatient rehab for food addiction. Um, and I still wasn't fixed. I still didn't feel good about myself. And I probably was 5 years sober. I got into a deep depression and I went to a place at Care Foundation that did family of origin work, which
Mm,
really helped because it really got to the core issues, right?
it's a,
Yeah.
yeah.
And anyway, I am working through it my way. Um, Sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, sometimes I
Good.
forget. But the self-care to get back to that and things we can do about that. Um, I do self-talk a lot because it's very easy for me to say negative things about myself. So if I drop something, I might say, "Oh, you're so clumsy." Okay. Now in the past, that was it. Now if I say that, I say, no, you're not clumsy. You just picked the cup up incorrectly or you weren't paying attention. Like I do that.
Yeah.
And some people might think she's crazy, but I have to undo those
Yeah.
negative.
There's a cool process called thought, second thought, first action. So we can't really control our thinking. It does change over time as neural pathways fade and we really build new neural pathways, which thank God for neuroplasticity. We understand that's a real thing and we can build a new brain. all the way to the end, unless we're brain damaged. Like that process continues to happen. So that's so powerful. But that first thought is a very familiar thought. And there's neurologically a thing called the default mode network. And our brain is actually incentivized to stay in the old paradigms because it's less work for the brain. That's the default mode network. So when we make changes, it takes a commitment to integration and the long game, the long term, to really see that manifest such that you would never have an original thought that was critical. But what you're describing now is a beautiful practice, which is I don't have to fuse with a thought. I can understand that I get to be human, and that's a real thing, and I am, and I'm not perfect, and we weren't designed to have to be perfect. Life is messy, and we're messy, and kind of come back with something different that is a practice of self-compassion and kindness towards yourself,
Yes.
right? Yeah, and then hopefully then you wouldn't need to go drink or have a behavior. You can
Oh,
have a different behavior of or
yeah.
eat or whatever it would be.
Or
Yes.
meditate. Or
Yeah,
outside at the beauty of nature. Or go outside and look at my garden.
exactly.
And,
Ex-
and also the second treatment facility, which was for eating disorders, we were there and they said, look in the mirror every morning and say, I love you. I couldn't do that. Not where I was at, not where I was at. So I went home and I couldn't do it. And I said, you know what? You like yourself, right? Yeah, okay. So every morning I'd look in the mirror and I'd say, I like you. I like you. And
Mhm.
that worked because eventually I got to I love you.
Yeah. And that incremental approach is again how we have to start where we are and get to where we get to. And I
Eggs.
appreciate that you were honest. Like you didn't at that point have a true felt sense of loving yourself. One of the ways, healing being from the inside out is, we think of attachment work as with others. Actually, we're reattaching to a sense of self, to ourselves. And so this idea that I am with Catherine in unconditional love towards this human being that is also accountable for her unconsciousness at times. So it's not about giving myself a pass or lowering the bar, but not out of ever being unkind or harmful to myself. Is I take responsibility for my humanness, and that's its own journey, right? That's literally, when you say what is it to have a relationship to self, it's actually like any other relationship. You have to start where you start, get through those conditioning forces, but then begin to just relate to. Relationship is relating to, so it's active, it's dynamic, it's about what we say to ourselves, it's about a lot of things. To
Yeah.
get to the point of what I hear you do is from a loving place, and there's a sense of cherishment, there's a sense of protectiveness, not defensiveness, but a protectiveness of our preciousness. We are no greater than anyone else, no better, but no less than. And there starts to be a really different dynamic that gets to go on.
And
Yeah,
I had to go through what I had to go through.
sure.
Like everybody that's listening does not have an alcohol problem or have to go to a addiction place or anything like that. But for me, I was asleep. I was self-medicating, so I was asleep. So I
Mhm.
would not be able to get what you're saying if I tuned on to a show where you were
Yeah.
speaking. I just changed the channel. Like I wasn't there,
Yeah,
right?
and Mimi, people can actually feel kind of ashamed that they'll read a self-help book or listen to a podcast, and then it's again just another version of what's wrong with me, that I'm not drinking 8 glasses of water a day, or I'm still overeating, or I'm picking poor relationships. When we are relating to ourselves and relating with these very new and different standards, modeled to us or not, that's the way we enter the world, not needing from other people any longer their validation that I'm enough, I'm lovable, which is codependence. And then having a high bar of like, and you get to even not choose me. And I get to not choose you, because how one is treated matters. And so, to your point of some of your history in choosing people that didn't treat you well, the correlation is, when you start loving yourself, that's the new normal. And that's even who you then attract, and who you're attracted to. Yeah. Yeah. But I hear you that this stuff takes time. What I would propose is it can get in there in unconscious ways, just kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of the magic of it. I will sit with people sometimes for a few years. And what I now appreciate for those I've worked a little longer term with is just hung in there as the brain was. It looked like nothing was going on because it didn't seem like, nope, I don't relate to that. And all of a sudden, we cross a threshold that had been being built the whole time. So I would say to your listeners, keep reading the books, keep sitting with the thing that doesn't yet feel yours, keep listening to podcasts if you can,
Mhm. Now,
so that you give yourself a chance to absorb. And
yes.
again, it's neurological, it's brain development stuff.
Now, what would bring someone to your practice? Like, what would be their circumstance?
Well, because I'm this deep diver, they will come for relationship troubles, or they will come for anxiety or depression.
Okay.
I'm Because I don't provide medication, that's not my license
Right.
anyway.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in, okay, obviously our shared goal is to reduce depression, anxiety, and relationship troubles. But let's slow down enough to get curious. Where is it coming from? So if somebody says to me, well, I don't feel good about myself. Oh, so you struggle with worth? Yes, I do. Esteem. Well, I don't know that I can help you with anxiety, because people that don't know they're good enough every day are going to have the anxiety of perfectionism, of a sense of pressure to show up in a world, especially Western culture, where the culture has kind of conditional worth. There's not a way to make that go. I mean, but what I can help you with is realize that's a young part of you that holds that belief. It's really not even all of you. And you don't have to believe that belief, even though Catherine's 14-year-old used to believe that. The rest of Catherine can hold the truth for that 14-year-old. Then I can help you with your anxiety, because we're going to ultimately resolve its source. Same
And
thing with depression.
yes.
We can do things like get exercise and make sure that we have meaningful activities and don't drink too much for those that drink, or at all, kind of thing. But what's driving it? And that's relationship troubles are often, do I have two adults that really the marriage or the relationship is, we have young parts, actually trauma parts, having the relationship. It's like, oh, this isn't about just communication work. The
Mhm.
poor communication is because you're not in your whole brain when you're trying to talk. And that means you're that 7-year-old, right?
Yes,
This in a reaction. So
exactly.
and that tends to be why I do longer term work, is it's not going to be, we're not going to, again, we could feel better temporarily, but this stuff is going to come back in some form unless we get to resolution
All right.
and deeper healing.
And I'm glad you mentioned Western culture because as a woman, we get disrespected there a
Mhm,
lot of times by
mhm,
men. And
mhm,
well, it's pretty obvious right now what's going on. Like a lot of
mhm,
rights are being taken away from women.
mhm,
Unbelievable. And I
mhm,
also see that with people of color and with the gay community. Um,
mhm.
things being pushed back to the way it was in the 50s, the 1950s. And I'm like,
What is
well,
happening?
you know,
Well, and that's the marriage of social change that some of us either saw or as children knew and then saw right in the 60s, and kind of a culture waking up.
yeah,
While those movements came from injustice and kind of a consciousness, if
mhm,
at the individual level, not at the collective level, we don't also do the deep dive work and change from the inside out,
yeah,
it's a slippery slope. Because if I don't feel protective of my sense of self, again, not arrogance, not ego, just a whole and healthy sense of self,
right.
I'm enough, then I wouldn't protect. Like, it's just, so how do we get there? Or how do we slide back? The kind of work you're doing, the kind of work I do at an individual level can feel like, oh my gosh, how can we change a culture when I'm just seeing one person 1 hour at a time? But we have to embody this to then have the cultural shifts
Yes.
remain and
Yes.
sustained. Yeah. And so while the laws are there to protect those who are different, is the consciousness there in terms of those who are different and marginalized?
The laws are being rescinded. That's scary
Exactly.
part. That's what scares me. And that's not even
Yeah.
this topic. It just jumped into my head because it's on my mind a lot. Of course, it's on the news. It's all over. But for just the individual and just trying to get through your own life and understanding, there's the macrocosm and the microcosm, and we can't change the world. I know that. I try to reach as many people as I can. Um, my first book that I wrote, Raised by Wolves, Trapped by Demons, the wolves were my parents.
Yeah.
They did not teach me things they should have. And then they didn't want me to leave the cave. But when I finally escaped, who did I think was going to protect me but a man? And the men I picked were very damaged, controlling men. So I was put into a situation, and it reminds me of Plato and the metaphor of the cave. And the people that live in the cave, all they knew was darkness their whole lives. And they could climb out of the cave, but they were afraid to climb out of the cave.
Well, exactly. And one of the things, just to stay for a minute, I appreciate that you're doing kind of with what's going on in our country and this cultural uh, experience right now, is the idea of the shadow. So if as human beings we have a shadow, and that some would think of that as unconsciousness or our ego self or our probably young wounded self, but that's our shadow. Well, then that can be in the collective. So that's how I've tried to work with my own heartbreak and fear around what's happening. Is this is kind of like, oh, there's the good. 50 years later, here's the shadow to contend with. So we're really at an inflection point, just like an individual person would be. Which wolf are we going to feed? The light
Mhm.
or the dark?
Yes,
It
yes.
all exists. It all exists. It's always all
Be
exists,
the light.
always existed.
Always be the light. I
Yeah.
had the privilege of meeting Marianne Williamson and Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dwyer, and read a lot of their books. Not all of
Yeah.
Deepak's. I don't know if you know, Deepak must have 200 books. He is
Yeah.
a prolific writer.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And I was raised Catholic, but I, for a lot of reasons, got away from that. And I found the unity movement, which is not really a religion, it's a
New
spiritual
thought.
community.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's about prayer. And it's about exactly what we're talking about: loving yourself, loving others, being kind, just doing the right thing. And that helps me quite a bit in my daily life. And it helps me stay connected, um,
Yes.
because I'm with
Well,
people.
and very
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was just to say, I'm with people of like mind, which helps a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, that's that raising the bar. We don't have to be in judgment of others to say, I will not choose this. If you would like to choose me, I invite you into a kind of way of being. And I'm not gonna, that's not really a negotiable line. And I can still have love in my heart for
Mhm.
very unconscious people that I would not choose or invite kind of into at a sense of tribe.
Right.
But we can think of kind of what I hear you saying, Mimi, is there's a core sense of self. And it's kind of highlighted by, they call it 8 C's. And this is from internal family systems. But the 8 C's of the core self is connectedness, compassion, clarity, courage, curiosity,
Huh?
creativity, confidence. Well, that's also, there's other approaches like polyvagal work. These are all psychodynamic kinds of approaches to doing therapy, and even the psychedelic movement. It's all about whole brain.
It
Now,
is.
whole brain, so when you say it's about having kindness, it's about being calm and not in a reaction. That's one of the 8 C's also, is calm. That's whole brain functioning. Well, those people that have not been able, if they were raised in a fight or flight environment, the petri dish of that, a chaotic,
Yes.
an abusive, if they've had trauma, they don't, other than once in a while experiences of
Mm.
that whole brain expansive place, which for some people is how the drug seeking happens. Because
Yeah.
excuse me, I finally feel calm and collected, but of course it's infused with chemicals, which is fraught. And so that's again my kind of goal, even if somebody doesn't come in going, Catherine, you're my new therapist. I need to live from my whole brain. I'm just thinking, what are we working with? How often are you fused with a part that is a part of you, but also young and or traumatized or injured? And how often can we live in that whole brain state? And
Hmm.
it's so powerful to know that scientifically, that is a neurological reality. It's not something we even have to, that there's a self neurologically that described by those 8 things that lives in us. Even if like the solar eclipse, it's like it seems pretty blocked by the moon or the clouds, it
Yeah.
exists. And that's very hopeful for people. And then what I have more of late been doing is just helping people really install that and ground in that, um, so that they know the contrast of when I'm not in that state, when I'm fearful versus courageous, when I'm reactive versus calm, when I'm judgy versus compassionate.
Right.
Yeah.
The 8 C's, it's so funny you mention that because a few months back we had a retreat and Martha Creek, I don't know if you ever heard of her, but she did the retreat. In fact, I have a couple podcasts with her as a guest,
Mm,
and
good.
she talked about the 8 C's. So as soon as
Exactly.
she said that, I went, oh yeah, I remember those. Yeah, I
That's
have
it. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
somewhere. But that's true because I think, okay, I used to be triggered, the old me, let's say. I used to be triggered by something, and I would get a feeling, usually anger, and I would react. Okay.
Right.
Today, I'm not triggered as much, but sometimes I am. And if I get triggered, whether it's a tone of voice, a look, something that was said, something that was not said or not done, I still get a little trigger. I get the feeling, but then I stop and I sit and I say, what is this feeling? Why am I feeling it? And then I do a response to that. I don't know.
And what you're describing, which is really important for people to tag, is emotional regulation work. What we don't want to do is spiritual bypass, where I have a feeling, ooh, this is a negative feeling, and we only have positive feelings. That's toxic positivity.
Yeah.
What it can be is there is a human feeling, and instead of being flooded with that feeling and fused with it, i.e., then it's controlling me and I'm reacting externally, I hear that you sit, and as I've had to do too, because I've had quite a temper, and no one told me that. It was like, no, express your feelings. It's like, actually, no, Catherine, it's about feeling them. And once those waves happen, which are neurotransmitters,
Yes.
it's pretty quick. Then
Hmm.
from a whole brain place, I can be calm, knowing there is also anger, but not anger running the show, or fear
Yes.
or sadness. Yes. So, and triggers, this is interesting, Mimi. Yes, they're to be prevented. They are no fun. But if we think about how the human system works, disassociation is what the human system does. So it's any pain and unfinished business I have is actually looking for a similar enough situation to activate what's still held by the body in the pain body. And so triggers are our friends, because if I had something from childhood, but I'm 61 years old, and if
Mhm.
it comes up, it's like, oh, there's still some residual pain here. So that's why we need to have this kind of, oh, so I'm going to turn a U-turn toward that pain from the core self and be very glad it came up, because I'm that much more healed as I attend to that pain,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
that's very odd for people to hear. That's a very big reframe, is
It-
triggers are our
yes.
friends. Hmm.
Well, yes, if we, like we just said, we look at Okay, why? Not react, not pick up the phone and tell the person that
Exactly.
which makes
Yes.
write an email. Oh, I was great for sending out emails. Write the email, but wait a while before you send it out.
Well, that's right. And if
Well,
and and what I would offer, just because many people, like in the old days, thought self-care was selfish. Emotions are negative or positive. We were literally taught that. They are not negative or positive. They all have a critical role. They all have a different adaptive action,
mhm,
and they come from different places. If
yes.
I'm angry, but I can't identify where was I betrayed or what is unfair or
Mhm,
what boundary was crossed,
right.
it may be defensive anger, which is the
Yes.
core anger is when I can name those things.
Yes.
And anger itself wants to be expressed. That's its adaptive action. But if I want to be heard, if you upset me, if we had a rupture, but if I come at you in a way that shuts your nervous system down, right? I'm
Mhm,
not going to get hurt. Your defenses are going to have to come up. So the goal of anger is for it to be expressed in a way that it's received. And
mhm,
so, like you say, can this email be received by another human being that is probably just imperfectly on a journey not to be too defensive and learning how to be accountable? So
mhm.
it's very, very important to slow down and practice mindfulness in terms of
Yeah.
what gets expressed, as it's also essential to do at times.
Yes. And I do have people in my life that only people that are still in their reactive phase. And I can't change them, but I'm trying to be a good
Yeah,
example. And,
good.
and I'm sure they
Yeah.
notice the change in me. But
Yeah.
what we're all talking about this past few minutes here, because it only feels like a few minutes, was
Yeah.
uh, having a healthy relationship with yourself is the only way you can have a good relationship with others, right? If you don't nurture yourself and have self-compassion, how can you do that with another person?
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. That there is a correlate there. Yes.
Yes. So this was wonderful. We talked a lot about inner growth, and we could talk more next time. I
Mhm.
get into maybe relationships themselves or a topic that you would like. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
lovely. It went by so quickly.
It sure did. Well, thank you for having me again. I love these conversations and the work that you're doing, Mimi, and just continue it for sure. And know that I'm a resource for you and for your listeners.
Oh, yes, I do count on you for that. And
Ah, yeah.
I do love talking with you because you have that just way of explaining things in a simple enough way that anyone can understand. You don't have to have, psychology degree or anything. So thanks,
No,
Catherine.
you're
I hope you have a wonderful day.
hey, thank you. You too, Mimi, for sure.
See you soon.
Okay, bye bye
And
now.
all my listeners now remember that. You look in the mirror, you can't say I love you, at least say I like you.